What would make a future king suspend every financial account connected to the queen consort's household? Her staffing budgets, her travel arrangements, her personal disbursement accounts, the entire administrative infrastructure that allows her office to function, and place every penny of it under his own authorization. Not the king's authorization. His. According to sources familiar with the events that preceded that decision, the answer reportedly began not inside the palace at all, but with a private meeting between King Charles and the man his wife had been married to before him. Andrew Parker Bowles had reportedly carried a secret for years, and when he finally decided he could no longer carry it alone, he passed it directly to the king through channels that left no official record, no paper trail, and no way for anyone inside the palace to prepare for what came next. Charles reportedly spent the night alone with what he had been told. He canceled dinner. He did not sleep. And by the following morning, according to those familiar with what followed, the palace had changed in ways that nobody inside it had been authorized to explain. Tonight we walk through every layer of this story, the secret Andrew carried, the meeting that changed everything, the document Charles placed on a table before Camilla arrived, and the final conversation between William and his stepmother that nobody outside that room has ever fully described. Stay until the very end. What passed between them in that room is the detail that reframes everything that came before it. If you are new to the Royal Pulse, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. You do not want to miss where this story goes. Now let us get into it. The memo arrived on a Tuesday morning and did not announce itself as anything extraordinary. A single page circulated through the internal correspondence system that senior palace staff used for routine administrative updates, bearing the kind of bureaucratic language that normally produced nothing more than a quiet acknowledgement and a filed copy. The people who read it that morning did not file it quietly. They read it twice. Some read it 3 times. Then they looked at one another across their desks with the particular expression of people who have just understood that something has changed permanently and that nobody is going to explain it to them directly. The memo concerned Queen Camilla's household financial allocations, travel arrangements, staffing budgets, personal disbursement accounts, the administrative infrastructure that allowed her office to function as the office of a queen consort. All of it had been placed under immediate suspension pending what the document described only as a review of expenditure. No timeline was given. No context was offered. No name appeared anywhere in the memo except in the authorization line at the bottom. The name there was not Camilla's. It was not Charles's. It belonged to the office of the Prince of Wales. William had signed it. Those who knew the palace well enough understood immediately that the language was not accidental. A review of expenditure carries no legal weight, no formal implication, no public exposure. It is on its surface the most ordinary phrase an institution can produce. And yet inside a household where financial arrangements touching a queen consort had never before been suspended by anyone other than the sovereign himself, the word review landed with the force of something considerably heavier. By 9 that morning, the corridors had taken on the specific quality of silence that palaces produce when something genuinely significant has happened and nobody has been authorized to speak about it. Camilla was not there. A routine engagement had been listed in her diary for that morning. A brief visit to a charitable organization she had supported for several years. It had been canceled, not rescheduled. Canceled with no statement and no explanation provided to the organization that had been expecting her. Her office door, which would normally have been opened by 8, remained closed. A member of her household staff arrived to collect her morning correspondence and found the tray outside untouched. She always collected them herself. The staff member would later tell a colleague that in 20 years she had never once left them sitting. William had been seen leaving a private meeting with 2 legal advisors at 7 that morning. By 8:15, the memo had been distributed. By 9, the palace understood that something had happened that could not be easily undone. What nobody yet understood was where it had truly begun, or who had handed William the reason to end it. 6 weeks before the memo, a message was passed through an intermediary, not through official channels, not through the structured correspondence systems that govern communication between senior royal figures and the people connected to them, not through any of the formal pathways that leave records, require acknowledgement, or pass through the hands of private secretaries trained to document everything that moves across a principal's desk. The message moved instead through a retired equerry, a man who had spent the better part of 3 decades in and around royal service, who knew both households in the way that only long proximity produces, and whose name would mean nothing to the public, but carried in the relevant circles the particular weight of someone trusted precisely because he had never given anyone reason not to trust him. Andrew Parker Bowles was requesting a private audience with the king. The request itself was not without precedent. The two men were not strangers. They had moved through overlapping worlds for decades, military circles, the social geography of the English countryside, the kinds of formal occasions where people who share a complicated history nonetheless find themselves in the same room and manage it with the practiced ease of their generation. What made this request different was the channel through which it arrived and the instruction attached to it. Andrew had asked specifically that the meeting not be logged. No entry in the official diary. No staff present. No record of the conversation beyond whatever the two men chose to carry away from it themselves. In a household where nearly every interaction involving the king passes through at least one layer of documentation, this request was unusual enough that the equerry who carried it reportedly paused before delivering it, not from reluctance, but from an awareness that he was handing something across that once handed could not be retrieved. Charles agreed to the meeting. Those who learned of it afterward described his agreement as something between reluctance and inevitability, as though he had understood from the specific nature of the request and the identity of the man making it that whatever Andrew had been carrying, he had now decided he could no longer carry alone. And that understanding had produced in Charles not resistance, but a quiet acceptance that the conversation was going to happen regardless, and that the only question was whether he met it directly or waited for it to find him another way. The meeting took place on a Wednesday afternoon at a private address in the countryside. Not a royal residence, not a club, not any location with a connection to either man's official life. A house belonging to the retired equerry himself, made available with the kind of discreet generosity that old networks produce without needing to discuss. What Andrew said during that meeting remained between the two men, but what Charles looked like when he returned that evening was something his staff would remember. Not shaken, not angry, something more difficult to name than either. The look of a man who had just been handed something he recognized and had been hoping for a very long time that he would never have to hold. Charles did not summon Camilla through the usual channels. No message passed through a private secretary. No entry added to the official diary. No formal notation of the kind that transforms a private conversation into an institutional record. He simply sent word through a single member of staff, given nothing to write down, that he wished to speak with her that afternoon. The informality was itself a signal. In a household where even the most intimate exchanges between senior family members move through at least one layer of administrative structure, the absence of that structure communicated something no accompanying message could have made plainer. She came within the hour. The room Charles had chosen was one they both knew well. A smaller sitting room on the upper floor of the private residence, used for conversations that required distance from the working areas of the household. No desk positioned to establish authority. No arrangement of chairs designed to manage the power between two people. Just a room and a document on the low table between them that Charles had placed there before she arrived and had not touched since. Camilla looked at the document before she looked at him. It was a single sheet, a photocopy, not an original, bearing a date from the period immediately following her divorce from Andrew. Years before her marriage to Charles had been contemplated in any formal sense. The contents, as Charles would later describe them to his most senior advisor in the broadest possible terms, related to a private financial arrangement entered into during that period. An agreement documented in writing suggesting she had used knowledge acquired through her proximity to royal circles, knowledge she had no official standing to possess at that time, as a form of leverage in a negotiation that was on its surface entirely private. It was not in isolation a matter that carried legal consequence, but it was a document that in the hands of anyone with the context to understand what it described told a story about judgment, about the relationship between private conduct and public trust, about what a person had been willing to do at a moment when no one was watching. Charles asked her one question, not an accusation delivered with the force of certainty, but a question shaped with the careful precision of a man who had spent the previous 6 weeks deciding exactly how to hold what he had been given. He asked her to help him understand what the arrangement had been. The silence that followed lasted long enough that its length became its own kind of answer. Camilla spoke, not to deny the document's existence, not to challenge its authenticity. She spoke to reframe it. The arrangement had been mischaracterized, she said. The context had been lost. What appeared on the page as leverage was in her telling nothing more than a private negotiation between two people untangling a complicated shared life. Charles listened without interruption. When she finished, he did not respond to what she had said. He asked her instead about Andrew. Specifically, he asked whether she had any understanding of why Andrew had chosen to bring this forward now after so many years of having chosen not to. The question settled in the room. And Camilla, who had spent decades learning to navigate the precise terrain between what was said and what was meant inside this family, made the one response that told Charles everything the document alone had left uncertain. She did not say that what Andrew had shown him was untrue. She asked why he would do this to her. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment below right now with the words "I am still here." Let us see who is genuinely following this story all the way through. Within 48 hours of that meeting, the palace's internal financial review office had received new instructions. The instructions did not come through Camilla's household. They did not pass through the normal chain of communication that would have given her office any formal notification of what was being set in motion. They arrived instead through the king's private secretary, addressed to the keeper of the privy purse, the senior official responsible for the financial administration of the royal household, in the form of a memorandum requesting a comprehensive review of all expenditure associated with the Queen Consort's office over the preceding 3 years. The keeper of the privy purse had served in his role long enough to understand that a request of this nature arriving through this channel, without prior discussion and without accompanying explanation, was not a routine administrative exercise. He asked 2 questions. The first concerned the scope of the review. The second concerned who else had been informed. The answer to the second question told him everything the memorandum itself had not said. William had been included, not notified after the fact, not briefed as a courtesy. Included, present in the initial conversation from which the memorandum had emerged, his office copied on the instructions, his name appearing in the authorization chain in a position that placed him not as an observer but as a participant in directing it. In 20 years of royal financial administration, the keeper could not recall a precedent for the Prince of Wales occupying that position in a matter involving the Queen Consort's household. The changes that followed were quiet in the way that the most consequential changes inside a royal household always are. Camilla's engagement diary was the first visible sign. 3 appearances scheduled across the following fortnight, a hospital visit, a reception connected to one of her longest-standing patronages, a ceremony at which she had been expected to represent the crown, were removed without rescheduling. The organizations involved received brief communications citing scheduling conflicts. None were given alternative dates. Staff who managed her public calendar understood immediately that a scheduling conflict producing no rescheduling is not a scheduling conflict. It is a removal. 2 members of her household office were quietly reassigned over a single weekend. No formal announcement. No acknowledgement in any internal communication that would create a paper trail connecting the reassignment to anything beyond routine reorganization. Their building access was adjusted the following Monday morning. The official website updated its language around her patronages within the same week. Active descriptions of her role were softened into language referencing her historical association. Present tense replaced by past. Ongoing replaced by longstanding. The kind of editorial shift a communications team makes when it has been told to create distance without being told to explain why. Then came the letter from the keeper of the privy purse. It placed an administrative hold on the accounts associated with Camilla's household operations. Not a freeze in any legal sense, a hold. The distinction existed on paper. In practice, the effect was the same. The accounts through which her office had managed its day-to-day expenditure were no longer accessible without additional authorization that only one office could now provide. William's office. A member of her personal staff arrived that Thursday morning to find the correspondence tray outside her private rooms untouched for the 2nd consecutive day. The letters sat exactly where they had been placed the evening before. She had always collected them herself. The tray had never once been left waiting. One meeting still remained. Unlike every exchange that had come before it, This one had not been arranged through intermediaries or managed through the careful buffer of institutional protocol. William had asked to see her directly. She had not refused. She was already in the room when he arrived. Whether that was by design or simply the consequence of having arrived early, nobody in the corridor outside could confirm. What they could say was that when William entered, she did not stand. She remained in the chair she had chosen, not the one closest to the door, not the one that would have positioned her nearest to the exit, but the one beside the window, with the afternoon light behind her and the room's full length between herself and where he would be sitting. William sat. He placed nothing on the table between them. No documents, no files, no visible evidence of the weeks of work that had preceded this moment. He had made a deliberate decision to bring none of it into the room, and the absence of those materials was its own statement that what needed to be said did not require paper to support it. He spoke first. He told her he had not asked to meet in order to revisit the evidence, or to deliver any further institutional consequence, or to continue any argument that neither of them had formally begun. He said he had asked to see her because there was something he needed her to understand that no memorandum and no financial review could communicate, something that existed for him beneath the level of institution entirely. He told her about the quality of silence he remembered most from his childhood, not the silence of conflict. He had been too young for much of it to fully comprehend the conflict as conflict. What he remembered was the other silence. The particular quiet of a woman who had learned over years that the institutions surrounding her would not amplify her voice regardless of what she placed inside it. Who had understood that the protection she had been led to expect was conditional in ways never made explicit, and who had carried that understanding alone because there was nowhere inside that world to put it without cost. He was not equating the situations. He said that clearly. And Camilla, who had been watching him with an expression that gave away very little, gave away something at that. A slight shift in the set of her shoulders. The particular adjustment of a person who has prepared for one kind of conversation and has just understood they are in a different one. He said only that he had watched what silence protected in this institution and what it cost the people it was meant to protect, and that he had decided at some point he could not precisely identify that he was not willing to extend that silence simply because extending it was easier than the alternative. Camilla did not respond immediately. When she did speak, she said something that none of the people outside the room would ever hear repeated. Because William did not repeat it, and neither did she. Whatever passed between them in the minutes that followed stayed in that room completely. What left the room was different from what had entered it. Not resolution, not warmth, something more honest than either. A mutual acknowledgement of what had always been true between them, finally spoken into a space that could hold it without requiring anything further to be done about it. The door opened 20 minutes after it had closed. William left first. Camilla remained seated by the window for a while longer. The palace did not mark the change with any ceremony. That was consistent with how the institution had always managed its most significant internal shifts, not through announcement or acknowledgement, but through the gradual redistribution of small details that accumulate over time into a new reality that nobody can clearly remember arriving at. Camilla moved to a country residence outside the immediate orbit of the working household. The move was described in no official communication as anything other than a personal arrangement. The distance it created, geographic, institutional, symbolic, was not named. It was simply established and allowed to mean what everyone who observed it understood it to mean. Her patronages continued to list her name. The organizations she had supported did not receive formal notification of any change in her status. But the invitations that had previously arrived from the palace coordinating her appearances stopped arriving with the same regularity. Then they stopped arriving at all. The organizations adapted as organizations do, quietly redirecting their correspondence and adjusting their programs without saying anything publicly that might require the palace to respond. Charles carried what he was carrying in the way he had always carried the most difficult things, visibly only to those who knew precisely where to look. His public schedule continued without interruption. Those who worked most closely with him noted only that the particular energy he had always brought to private conversation, a quality of genuine curiosity, a full engagement with the person in front of him, was somewhat diminished in the months that followed. Not gone, diminished. The difference between a man fully present and a man present enough. William did not speak publicly about any of it. He did not need to. The authority he now carried inside the institution was not the authority of someone who had won an argument. It was something quieter and more durable, the authority of someone who had been tested against a genuinely costly decision and had not moved. That kind of authority does not announce itself. It simply exists, and the people around it adjust to it. And over time, the adjustment becomes the new landscape, and the moment that produced it recedes into the background of a family's complicated history. Andrew Parker Bowles was never publicly connected to any of it. His name remained in circulation for several weeks, carried by the momentum of public curiosity. Then the coverage moved on as it always does, and he returned to the comfortable periphery where he had always existed, having done what he decided to do and having left the consequences entirely to the people better positioned to manage them. What remained when the immediate noise had settled and the newspapers had found other stories and the palace had re-established the appearance of its ordinary rhythms was something that did not have a clean name. Not quite rupture, not quite resolution. The specific condition that a family arrives at when something true has finally been said that cannot be unsaid, and all of them must now build whatever comes next on ground that has permanently shifted beneath them. The palace doors did not close behind her. They simply open less often. And in the quiet spaces this family has always used to carry what it cannot say publicly, that distinction turned out to matter less than anyone had imagined, and more than anyone was prepared to say aloud. And that is where tonight's story ends. If this video gave you something real, if it made you feel the weight of what moves through this family beneath everything the palace presents to the world, hit the like button. Subscribe if you have not already and turn on that notification bell because what is unfolding inside this monarchy is far from finished and we are covering every single layer of it. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you are watching from and what your time is it right now. And give us your honest take. Do you believe Charles made the right decision once he knew what Andrew had carried to him? Or should some secrets have stayed buried? Every single comment gets read on this channel. We will see you in the next one.